Hello and welcome back to another episode of Drue Crime, but more importantly, welcome back to part 2 of Lauren Agee's case. I'm your host Drue V, and after publishing part 1, I received a nice increase in views and subscribers, so thank you very much to everyone for your interest in my podcast, TikTok, and YouTube channel. Now, I didn't really want to spend too much time on an intro for this episode, so if you have time and haven't heard part 1 yet, please go back and give it a listen, that way you can be caught up to this point. But if you are someone who is familiar with Lauren's case, feel free to stay right here and conclude this episode with me. In this episode, I make that big revelation that I've been talking about. Then I want to touch base on another girl, Sam Arnold, that I had mentioned in the previous episode. And Sam knew Lauren fairly well and was actually present at the campsite on the first night of the weekend. Then I will finish out the episode putting everything together with my speculated theory, including my thoughts and opinions on this case, and hopefully I can really show you what I believe may have happened to Lauren Agee. Again, a huge thank you to everyone that continues to tune in, so with that being said, I'm just going to dive right back into where I left off in part 1. This is Drue Crime, episode 9, Lauren Agee, part 2.
Mr. Nelson, you need to take a moment. Mr. Nelson, you need to take a moment with your attorneys. Hold on, sir. Members of the jury, Mr. Nelson.
I would like to provide the defendant and the court.
So that had to be said. So it's the defendant.
That's not how it was said.
That was how it said. You want to run the record back?
I'll just ask you, why do you keep refusing to get this man off my case when we keep having problems? Do you have something personal against me to where you don't want to remove him?
No, sir. I have something personal against not providing you effective assistance of counsel.
Now at this point in the story, we know 21-year-old Lauren Agee's death has been ruled by an accident by her falling off the campsite cliff in the middle of the night, but her death is nothing but suspicious, and in my opinion, it all really doesn't add up this far. I left off in part 1 talking about our new mysterious person who was present at Lauren's campsite the entire weekend, but like I said before, this information wasn't revealed until much later on in this case. So, the fifth person confirmed camping with the others was a guy by the name of Brix Gambrell, but goes by Brix. Now, I want to spend a few quick moments talking about Brix and where he kind of fits into all of this up to this point in time. Brix was Aaron's friend that he had invited along to Wakefest, where he helped set up the campsite, and even though all the boys later became good buddies, this weekend would be the first time that Chris Stout had ever met Brix. Brix had also gone to high school with Lauren and Hannah, and from what I understand, Lauren didn't associate with Brix at all. On social media, Brix has shown a strong interest in the German Nazi culture, and his father had previously been in prison for murder from years ago. And a picture from the Daily Mail article about this case shows his dad with a tattoo of the Third Reich symbol, which has been said to be linked to white supremacy. There's literally very little to no information out there about Brix, and it seems very fitting being that no one had any idea Brix was even at the campsite that weekend, and he's literally never mentioned early on in any statements from anyone involved in this case, including Chris, Aaron, Hannah, and even lead detective Jeremy Taylor. But there was one houseboat couple that did remember seeing Brix that weekend, and they even said Brix was with the rest of the group the entire time. Earlier on in the last episode, I had mentioned that the houseboat couple had noticed Lauren's absence on Sunday morning. So when the group was asked about Lauren not being there, it turns out Brix is in fact the one who responded she went back to the bar. Brix was also the reason their group was able to befriend and use the houseboat couple's lift to get the canoe in and out of the water that weekend, because in return he had been trading them in moonshine that he had brought along. Now, at the time, Brix also knew Lauren's brother through school, and just a day after Lauren's death, Brix showed up to Lauren's mother's home to talk to her about Lauren, and he had asked Sherry if he knew anything or had heard anything about Lauren's death. Well, a mourning and confused Sherry told him she did not know anything, and in return she asked him if he did since he told her he was at Wakefest, to which he quickly replied, okay, said goodbye, and then left. Remember, at this time, no one close to Lauren knew Brix was at the group's campsite that weekend, which I'm sure later on gave Sherry some chills now knowing he was actually present at her daughter's campsite. Brix had also posted some pictures on Instagram from Wakefest that year, and one of the captions read, "Wakefest 2015 was one to remember." Another thing about Brix, it wasn't until much later on in this case when one of Chris Stout's friends contacted Sheila from Without Warning podcast and told her he wanted to discuss the case with someone. Well, apparently Chris's friends was hanging out with Chris one day, and he had asked Chris about what had happened at the campsite the night before Lauren's body would be discovered. And his friend goes on to say that he could tell Chris really didn't want to talk about it, but what Chris's friend does end up saying in this interview is pretty chilling. So here's some clips from Chris's friend's interview that can be found on Without Warning's Brix Gambrell episode, which is a must listen if you're interested in this case. And I apologize if the audio is a little long, but I feel this interview to be very important given the small amount of information that is out there about Brix.
Me and Chris, we have been friends for a very long time. We rode motorcycles together and a lot of stuff. I asked him, straight up, dude, it's just me and you. What happened? His version that he told me, I have not heard on one video that I've watched it, and I've watched almost all of them on YouTube. His version is basically the same as most of them, but he says that when they went to sleep and woke up, that she was gone or whatever, that they thought that she had went back to her ex-boyfriend, that she had gotten into an argument with him and his new girlfriend at the bar, and they were like, oh, she must have left and went back because they got in a big fight, and she tried to leave and go home, but we took her keys and him behind a tree, so she couldn't get them and leave because she was drunk. But then he gets to telling me about this Brix kid that I haven't heard anything about yet. I've recognized his face from school because I went to Hendersonville High School. I recognize him, but I don't think I've ever really met him. But Chris tells me that the guy gave him really big I guess the silly word I can only think of, the heebie-jeebies, and scared him. And basically what he told me is that he thinks that Brix killed her, and somehow Aaron saw it or was walked up on it happening or something, and the Brix kid scared Aaron into shutting up, basically. And then he ran off to the Bahamas right after that happened. I don't know if any of that's true, as far as the running off or anything like that. I don't know anything about this. And so then he basically was like, I understand why her mom is doing this, but she's ruining my life, and I didn't do anything wrong. He was like, yes, her daughter was drunk and died, but he was like, I didn't do anything. He said that, they thought she ran off. But then, I don't know why he would come back and tell me that the Brix kid gave him the heebie-jeebies. I don't understand. I guess because he said once they found the body, and they thought she fell off, he tells me that he thought that maybe he would have done something like that. It just struck me as really odd. I've been thinking about this for a long time. The case got closed, and I didn't know what to do.
So after hearing some of that interview, you start to get a better understanding of how our new mysterious camper was being perceived that weekend, and I think it's fair to say it was in a very negative light. So according to this interview, Chris tells his buddy that Lauren went back from the campsite to be with her ex-boyfriend Clint, but before that, they had hid Lauren's keys from her, which really doesn't make any sense. Why would they try to hide her keys if she was going back to be with Clint that night? especially when no one has ever mentioned anything about Lauren trying to drive home that weekend and the fact that she had already asked another friend, Jade, to come pick her up earlier in the night. Then Chris tells his buddy that day that Brix gave him a weird feeling and he was also scaring Lauren that night. And then he says he thinks Brix is the one who's responsible for Lauren's death and that he could see Brix doing something like this. Chris also seems to think that Aaron Lilly walked up on this happening, which then led to Brix scaring Aaron into not saying anything as well. Now, all of these things are some pretty heavy allegations coming from Chris's version of the story, but with so much silence and secrecy surrounding Brix being at the campsite that weekend, I really start to wonder if Brix was somehow involved. Real quick, I wanted to point out that during the time that Chris was incarcerated for a DUI in 2016, he had spoken to Brix on the phone about this case, and for some reason Brix was watching both Chris's house and boat while he was locked up. But why? These two guys weren't that good of friends from what I understand, so was Brix watching Chris's assets because he was a trustworthy friend? Or was Brix watching his possessions in case Chris decided to start doing some talking? I personally feel Chris has nothing to do with Lauren's death, but I do speculate he knows exactly what happened that night. Now, before Sheila and her team knew anything about Brix, they had actually gone down to Florida to interview Hannah Palmer at her home, and though Aaron was not at home during most of this interview, there was another person present in the room during this entire interview. Well, it turns out this random person was that of Brix Gambrell, and according to Sheila, he was not very happy that they were there. During this interview, Sheila had no idea who Brix was at the time, but again, we have Brix randomly showing up in this story, which is another reason why I really start to believe that Brix knows a lot more about what happened that night as well. Also, I wanted to point out here that during this interview, Aaron had called Hannah's phone, and Sheila and her team could hear Aaron tell Hannah, "Stick to the story." And you can find this interview on the Without Warning podcast, and that's under the episode Stick to the Story. So, in conclusion to Brix, we have confirmation that he was present at the campsite that weekend. We know that Brix showed up to Lauren's mother's house unannounced, asking questions the following day after Lauren's death. And we now know that Brix was present for Hannah Palmer's interview with Sheila all the way down in Florida. So if Brix was in all of these places along the course of this case, then why did it take so long for anyone to even mention his name? There has to be some kind of connection somewhere between Brix and others that have kept so quiet about this case, but unfortunately I found nothing credible that can prove this. Also, after Lauren's death, Brix bailed town, and go figure, he was never once interviewed by any DeKalb County sheriffs during this entire investigation. Now, moving on to Sam Arnold for a moment, and the reason I bring up Sam in this episode is because she was supposedly a friend of Lauren's at the time, but in my opinion, Sam really exhibits a lot of strange behavior along the course of this case. Sam is the one who had originally invited Lauren to Wakefest that weekend. Sam had gone to Wakefest with Aaron's old girlfriend Cassie Banks that I spoke about in the last episode, and on the first night, Friday, Cassie and Hannah Palmer had gotten into an argument over Aaron by the bar Fish Lips, so Cassie would end up leaving the bar area while also leaving Sam by herself with none of her belongings. From what I understand, Aaron Lilly was very concerned that Sam didn't have a place to stay now, so Sam would end up spending the night with the rest of Lauren's group at their campsite. Then the following day on Saturday, Cassie would come back with Sam's things and Sam would end up leaving their campsite. I think others would agree with me here that it's a little interesting that Aaron was so concerned about Sam having a place to stay the first night, but then on Sunday, when Lauren is nowhere to be found and then found dead in a cove, Aaron showed zero concern. So Sam would then see Lauren again that night on Saturday at the bar Fish Lips. Well, according to Sam, Lauren and Clint's girlfriend Callie got into an argument that night, but turns out, according to many different witnesses, this never even happened. Also that same night, Sam was leaving Wakefest with Cassie, and Lauren said she wanted to go back home with Sam. So then Sam says she waits for Lauren to go back to the campsite to get her things and tell the others she was leaving. But Lauren never came back, so Sam decided to leave. But before that, she says she texted Lauren and told her to text her back when Lauren got home from Wakefest, but this text never even happened as well. It's important to know here that Sam even said in an interview on Without Warning podcast that you could shout from the docks and they could hear you from the campsite. So if Lauren was taking too long, why didn't Sam just shout up there if they were able to hear it so easily? But even a better question here is, why was Sam even making these things up about Lauren? Well, to add to some of Sam's strange behavior in this case, Sam later on starts to kind of turn on Lauren's family. According to Lauren's dad, Brian Agee, a week before the funeral, Sam wanted to be so involved in Lauren's funeral preparations, but wasn't really included by the family. So Sam became upset about this, and for some reason, she had even signed Hannah Palmer's name on some memory items for Lauren and her family that were at the funeral, when Hannah wasn't even there. Then Sam decides to jump ship over to the other campers, mainly Hannah, by starting to say that Lauren's death was an accident, and even attacking Lauren's character as well. In conclusion to Sam, I'm not quite sure where Sam really fits into all of this or why she flipped sides, but I do start to wonder to myself, was Sam already upset at Lauren for something? Was she jealous of Lauren for some reason? Sam was just another person that was with Lauren that weekend, and the fact that she took Hannah's side later on saying Lauren's death was an accident is very interesting to me. Now, I wanted to go ahead and take the rest of the time by getting into my speculated theory as to what I think may have happened to Lauren and how it all could have gone down. Then I'll go ahead and conclude this episode and let you know what case I'll be covering next. Before I begin with my theory, I wanted to say that I do not believe that Lauren's death was an accident, and I do speculate her cause of death came from some type of foul play and was then covered up. All of the people involved in this case that I have spoken about in this two-part series are all innocent until proven guilty, and no one has ever been charged with any crime related to Lauren Agee's death. My speculated theory will begin when Lauren's body was found, which was on Sunday, July 26, 2015, around 4:30 p.m. A lot of people are probably wondering how Lauren's body got into that cove, and DeKalb County officials seem to think she floated there. Well, according to some science that was done on the currents, experts believe it would not have been possible for Lauren's body to drift from their campsite around the cliff and into the cove. And this was just another thing in this case that Detective Jeremy Taylor did not investigate, who, might I add, at this point in time had zero experience in any other death investigations. Cooney Hollow, which was the name of the cove, was out of sight from the marina and boat traffic, so in my opinion, I think it's fair to say that Lauren's body was placed in that cove and did not drift there on its own. Remember, Lauren's body did not show signs that she had been in the water for very long, and this becomes important later on in this theory. So after Lauren's body was discovered, both Chris Stout and Aaron Lilly were aggressively the first ones on scene asking if that was their friend, but for some reason at this point, the two never reported that they had a friend missing. Then Ryan Mallinson and Chris Yarchuk start to question the two men and Hannah about the night before, and both of these officers did face a lot of scrutiny from the community and other fellow officers just because they voiced their opinion and tried to do the right thing in this case. Real quick here, if you're wondering where Brix was at this point in time, he was supposedly with two other girls that he knew, and when Sheila Wysocki reached out to these girls to confirm this, both did not respond. So after the other campers were spoken to, the original story was that Lauren left in the middle of the night to go back to her ex-boyfriend Clint, but we know this not to be true. So then the story changes to Lauren using the restroom in the middle of the night and falls to her death accidentally. Now, this cliff they were staying on was not straight up and down, it was at a slant. Sheila and her team have done many tests by throwing a Lauren replica dummy off this cliff, and not one time did the dummy even get close to the water. Also, it would have been dead quiet around that marina area around that time Lauren supposedly fell, but there were zero screams heard by anyone. I think some of the injuries on Lauren's body could be consistent with a fall, but I agree with Mark Gillespie in this case that most are not. The clothes that Lauren was discovered in looked brand new, there were no tears, and showed no signs that were consistent with a fall. Plus, if Lauren supposedly fell while using the restroom, wouldn't her shorts have been pulled down a little bit lower? But instead, they were pulled up and perfectly on her when she was discovered. Lauren's mother, Sherry, knew the clothes did not belong to Lauren, and no eyewitnesses from Saturday ever saw Lauren in these pink shorts before her body would be discovered on Sunday afternoon. So the huge mystery here remains, whose clothes were they, and how did they get onto Lauren's body? Now, as to why any of this even happened to Lauren in the first place, I do have a few theories. We know Lauren and the rest of the group went back to the campsite around 2:30 a.m., and this was confirmed by Officer Yarchuk, who was working security Saturday night. I speculate Lauren was ready to leave the campsite when they got back, but they wouldn't let her. I feel this way because Lauren had asked several people on Saturday night if she could go home or stay with him, and it has been confirmed by Chris Stout that they took Lauren's keys from her and hid them behind a tree. There have also been rumors that drugs may have been present at the campsite, and from what I understand, Brix was being creepy as well, so I think these are two perfect reasons as to why Lauren probably wanted to leave. So now Lauren is basically stranded at this campsite, and this is when I speculate she was attacked by someone from behind with no chance of screaming, coming from either strangulation or blunt force trauma to the back of her head. I think there are a few possibilities as to why Lauren may have actually been attacked, and the first possibility could be that one of the males at camp made a pass at Lauren and she rejected their advance, thus resulting in a physical attack. A second possibility that could be was there was a big argument between Lauren and someone and things just kind of got out of control. Third possibility is Lauren was kept quiet because she did see drugs or some type of illegal activity at the campsite and was probably going to say something to someone. Whatever the reason being, I do speculate Lauren was attacked that night and everything else that followed was covered up. Now at this point we know there was one way for Lauren's group to get from the docks to their campsite, and it was by canoe. But what if I told you that wasn't the only way to get to their campsite that weekend? During my research, I was on Google Maps and I discovered there is in fact another way to get to the campsite, and it's not by boat or canoe, but by vehicle. There is an accessible road that leads to the back part of where the group was camping at, just off to the right of Obi-Atuk Road. This accessible road does not have a name and just turns into a dead end at the end of the road. So now it makes sense how the group besides Lauren and Hannah got all of their gear up to that cliffside campsite. They didn't carry it up a cliffside using a rope and just one of their hands. They used the back way. So now that I speculate Lauren was attacked at camp, I think that it happened in the early morning hours on Sunday. I agree with forensic investigator Gillespie and Chris Yarchuk, who has 12 years experience diving for bodies, that Lauren's body was not in the water for very long, and I also agree that the currents of the water did not drift Lauren to her location. So the big question still is, how did Lauren's body get there then? Well, I think it's very plausible Lauren's body was transported by vehicle or truck. Now, from what I understand, everyone's vehicles were parked close to fish lips during that weekend. Looking at Google Maps, it would have been possible for a vehicle to reach close to their campsite, starting from fish lips, using Jefferson Road to Highway 288, then taking a left on Allen Bend Road at Belk's Sporting Goods and Grocery. Then whoever could have proceeded and took a left on Obi-Atuk Road, which then takes them to a dirt road off to the right, leading to the backside of the campsite. Then after her body was placed in a vehicle, someone then at some point drove over to the Cove Coney Hollow by Still Point Road and placed Lauren's body in the water using the steep boat ramp, which this ramp was rarely used, let alone the cove itself. This is also where I lean towards the bruises and marks on her arms coming from someone or someones lifting Lauren's body into the water. Then whoever it was just drove back the same way they came to drop off the vehicle back at Fish Lips, again where I do believe Aaron and the other campers had originally been parked. This is all speculation, of course, but it wouldn't be impossible for one of these campers to pull this off, and to me it makes a lot of sense. But one big problem with all of this is that no DNA was ever taken from anything that was used by any of the campers that weekend, which could have told us a lot more of what all happened. Also, I do have to point out real quick that eyewitnesses did see Aaron Lilly leaving Wakefest early, just hours before Lauren's body would be discovered, and not pointing any guilt towards Aaron at all, but if this is in fact true, it's very, very interesting to me. Now, before I conclude this theory, I forgot to point out that on Sunday night between 9 and 10 p.m., an eyewitness, Mike Cantrell, said he saw a big fire up by Lauren's campsite after everyone had supposedly gone home, and of course, this was never investigated. So the questions here are, who was up there? Why were they allowed up there when it should have been taped off as a crime scene? And what were they burning? Well, we know a bunch of Lauren's belongings were suddenly lost in this case, and Jeremy Taylor wouldn't even tell Lauren's families what they had of hers, so it really starts to make me wonder what might have been burned in that fire that night. In conclusion to my speculated theory, again, I do feel that Lauren's death was the result of some type of foul play, then someone or someone's moved her body to a different location, then everyone had time to get their stories straight, and it was made to look like an accident. So if it was an accident, then why did DeKalb County sheriffs and the other campers involved in this case do so little to make anything make sense? Everything about Lauren's death was never investigated properly and just covered up by DeKalb County officials. But why? Was it because Wakefest brought in a lot of revenue for that area every year and they didn't want the reputation of the event to be tarnished? Or is there just some kind of connection between all of these people involved that we just can't see? Whatever the reason or reasons are, I think the changing of the other campers' stories, the fact they pled the fifth, the secrecy surrounding Bricks at the campsite that weekend, the consistent blackballing of Lauren's family are all just a few of many huge red flags in this case, and it needs to be reopened with a fresh set of eyes, preferably not by any law enforcement in the state of Tennessee. There was zero accountability by law enforcement in this case, and one reason I think this is because in the state of Tennessee they cannot be sued for not doing their job, which is exactly what they didn't do. Well, a huge thank you to everyone who made it this far with me on this case. It was my first time doing a two-part series, and I have to say, looking into this case, it has been a great experience, but it's also been very challenging as well. I can't even imagine what Lauren's family and friends have to continue to go through to try and get some type of justice and answers they deserve. I hope I was able to get to most of the evidence and help make better sense of where this case has gone over the years. There's tons of information out there for everyone, so I very much encourage anyone to check out the Without Warning podcast that covered this case closely and listen for yourself. For my next case, I will be covering the questionable murder of 20-year-old Molly Tibbetts. Molly's case got plenty of national attention back in 2018 when she was murdered while taking a jog one evening close to her home in Brooklyn, Iowa. Molly was murdered by a man named Christian Bahina Rivera, and Rivera was sentenced to life in prison back in 2021. But from what I have researched thus far, I can't say I entirely agree with its outcome quite yet. So stay tuned for this next one. It's already been very puzzling so far, and I will have that episode loaded up here in the next 2 weeks. Thank you again everyone for tuning in to another episode of Drue Crime. My always friendly reminder, love everyone but trust no one. I'm your host Drue V, and we'll see y'all back here very soon.